Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches. First of all, apologies that it's been a whole week since the last video. We went out on Friday and I completely forgot about recording this video, at least until this morning. So, belatedly, today I will be talking about the 1990 post-apocalyptic cheapy Italian action film 1990, Bronx Warriors, or 1990, The Bronx Warriors, depending on the box art, basically. And as the introductory scroll of this film tells us, in the year 1990, the future, the New York authorities declared the South Bronx to be a high-risk area, a no man's land, and or no person's land, but it was 82. The authorities abandon any further attempt to restore law and order to the area, and they leave it to the control of outlaw gangs such as the Riders, the Iron Men, and the Sharks. The film then introduces us to 17-year-old Anne, who is the daughter of the deceased owner of the Manhattan Corporation, a gigantic arms manufacturing company. Anne is going to inherit the corporation upon her 18th birthday, and perhaps understandably, she feels conflicted with guilt over inheriting such a morally dubious organisation. Rather less understandably, she reacts to this situation not by planning to try and reform the corporation, but by fleeing into the wasteland of the Bronx. Soon after arriving in the Bronx, Anne is targeted by a roller skating gang called the Zombies, but is saved by members of the Riders and taken under the protection of the Riders' leader, the implausibly pretty young man known as Trash. However, the Manhattan Corporation has no intention of leaving its soon-to-be owner in the hands of the Riders and hires a ruthless and psychopathic mercenary named Hammer to recover her. A task Hammer approaches with such violent gusto that it soon becomes doubtful that anyone in the Bronx, including Anne, will survive the experience. So, producer Fabrizio De Angelis apparently got the idea for this film when he missed a subway stop for his Manhattan hotel and ended up in a dangerous neighborhood in the Bronx. It inspired him with the idea of a futuristic city where young hoodlums would fight for their home. De Angelis and screenwriter Dardano Sacchetti put together a story, stealing liberally from the Warriors and Escape from New York in the process. Shall we say, inspiration from both is not hard to see. And then during its 5 weeks of pre-production and 7 weeks of shooting, the script underwent further evolution at the hands of director Enzo Castellari. This rapid and very fluid approach to production is pretty common of low-budget Italian films of the era, though unusually for such fare, many of the outdoor scenes were actually filmed on location in the Bronx. Of course, the real question to consider here is the resulting movie worth seeing? So let's dig into that. And the first thing I think we have to do is acknowledge that the writing is somewhat lacking when it comes to making sense. I've already alluded to the fact that Anne's decision to flee into the Bronx is a very strange reaction to her circumstances. While I guess it does at least temporarily put off any possibility of her inheriting the Manhattan Corporation, it does nothing to address the corporation's problematic nature or operations. And if she doesn't care about that and just wants to avoid taking responsibility, well, there are surely less dangerous ways to do that. Just sell the company for a nominal amount of cash, for instance. But the wait, what? Elements of the script definitely don't end there. A major theme of the film's final act is that it's extremely hard for Trash and the Riders to make it to territory belonging to the Ogre. The Ogre, who is played by B-movie legend Fred Williamson, is the most feared and powerful gang leader in the Bronx and the only man with the firepower to help the Riders take on Hammer. And all of this is fine if it weren't for the fact that an earlier scene has Trash and the Ogre hold a seemingly straightforward meeting without any issues at all. Why is it suddenly so difficult to reach him? Because the movie needs it to be. And the film's wider world building is also non-existent. How did the Bronx fall into complete anarchy? It just did. How is the rest of the United States impacted by this? Apparently not at all. How can Hammer and his hard goons so readily devastate the Bronx gangs when the entire might of the New York State and United States federal authorities could not? Don't ask, because the movie's not going to tell you. On the other hand, this blasé, laissez-faire attitude towards making sense does occasionally manifest in moments of gloriously cheesy craziness. For instance, one of Hammer's big assaults involves cavalry armed with flamethrowers, because you know what horses love? Massive amounts of fire. Oh, no, wait, I read that wrong. It seems that it's sugar cubes and apples that horses love. When it comes to massive amount of fires, they're actually fairly negative, at least in the real world. But for me, at least, this is the kind of absurdity that loops right through stupid and into awesome. At least in part, that's because there's no real stakes to accepting the scene as it is. There's no narrative contradiction in it, like there is in Ogre and Trash meeting easily in one scene and then later being separated by miles of dangerous territory, nor do any plot points later on hinge off the existence or otherwise of flamethrower cavalry. All that really matters is that we accept that Hammer has brought overwhelming firepower to the battle. This takes an improbable, probably ineffectual form that's more about style than substance, but that doesn't really matter. And to be fair to the film, style is something it does quite well. Trash and the riders look cool, if a smidgen derivative, and the action scenes are generally decently staged and executed, particularly for this kind of low-budget Italian fare. The final factor that I think will influence your opinions about the film is its tone. The Bronx Warriors starts from a rather apocalyptic, nihilistic assumption that the rule of law is crumbling to the point that a major section of the largest city in the United States would become a lawless wasteland. Now, plenty of 80s media assumed the collapse of society for various reasons, but few had it happen quite so imminently, and few then followed up with what is ultimately a deeply pessimistic story on multiple levels. For instance, this movie openly depicts the corruption and greed of corporate America, as represented in the film by the Manhattan Corporation, and the destructive agenda of its operatives. Given how the authorities and powerful corporations are depicted in the film, one can make the argument that the likely reason the Bronx was abandoned in this universe was not that the authorities could not control it, but they decided that it was more profitable not to bother. The nihilism isn't done there yet. Trash and the Ogre, Manhattan's executives, and the Mercenary Hammer all have agendas and objectives to fight and struggle for in this movie, but very few of them are going to get what they want. The form of each character's disappointment or failure varies, of course. Some will die, some will simply not get what they want, and so on. But if you're looking for something with a triumphant finale set to cheesy 80s synthpop, well, in this movie, you're going to have to make just do with cheesy 80s synthpop and nothing else. Ultimately, I think whether you should see 1990 The Bronx Warriors very much comes down to your level of affection for low-budget science fiction schlock. If you're a big fan of such nonsense, as I am, you might enjoy it. For anyone else, you're probably better off checking out or revisiting one of the films from which it drew so much of its inspiration. Because, Escape from New York and The Warriors, they're both a fun time. Next time, Guillermo del Toro's 2004 adaptation of Mike Mignola's supernatural action superhero comic book, Hellboy. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.